I just went to go see a film recommended by a local film critic. The film was about the extinction of the projectionist in the booth of celluloid film. So these are people who handle 35 millimeter film projections in movie theaters, and the film covers the thoughts, wistful at times, humorous others, of people who have made their lives working as those nameless, faceless projectionists, people up there in that booth, right behind you, above you, and showing you the film in a movie theater that many of us have grown up sort of seeing. I think the new generation today is probably being brought up entirely on digital films, and that's going to be the trend for the foreseeable future. And this is a sore point, a point of lamentation for many of these projectionists who, beside the fact that they are losing their jobs, a lot of them, they're also making qualitative comments on, the character, the nature, the texture, the feel, and the look of non-celluloid films. That is, films coming out of digital packages that now come out of a hard drive and are no longer really being spooled and shown through sort of these either incandescent or arc light projectors that have been the staple of movie theaters forever. And I felt that watching a movie like that was probably useful as a documentary, in the sense that what you're looking at is you're looking at the life of a certain person whose job is an important craft in the completion of a certain kind of art. So that projectionists in film theaters are the almost euphemistic equivalent of people who, for example, might stretch canvas or put up canvas, oil paintings in a gallery or museum. They're not curators because they don't really make, or not supposed to make, any stylistic or aesthetic decisions. Their job is really primarily to spool up film and show it in a way that everybody can sort of see it, And yeah, I mean, that's the job. And they're sad because a lot of their work is going away. And it's true that, as that film had pointed out, it's true that in 2008 less than 15% of the movie theaters in the United States were actually digital, whereas maybe last year they were 96% of the movie theaters were now digital. So it's true that the old analog celluloid film strip machinery is going away, and a lot of those theaters are closing down because they can't afford to make the $150,000 plus investment that is necessary to retrofit, or maybe future fit, if you like, anti-retrofit the theaters, so that now they can have digital projectors. And I feel bad for them, and I feel that's a bad thing. And I love film. I don't know who doesn't. The look of film is extraordinary. It's incomparable at this stage of the evolution of any visual medium with anything else. It's beyond, the look of film is beyond anything for depth and for quality. But at the same time, I'm also saddened by the view that something's going away when film is leaving and never again shall it be seen, and that's the end of it. Whereas I think, in very different terms, that film took a very long time as a medium to evolve. And if we look at films from the 1910s to the 1920s, and 20s to 30s, and 30s to 40s, 40s to 50s, 50s to 60s, and so on, we see a tremendous difference. in the quality and the depth of the film work that was being captured, because the medium was in evolution. That means the chemical process, the actual emulsion, the actual projector itself, lenses, everything changed. What's obvious then is that we got to leave a little bit of time for things to develop. We have to get them to a place where they can satisfy everybody. But that digital cinema is going to eventually develop to a point where everyone will probably like it as much as film. I don't necessarily see that it's a death knell for film, and therefore nothing else will come of it. It seems to me that there are tremendous advantages in the change. And, a lot of changes come with nothing good, but some come with something good. For instance, for you to have distributed your feature film to different theaters in celluloid form would have cost you $3,000 to have these prints made, and they would have weighed 80 pounds, and it cost a tremendous amount of money to ship around. So that essentially the filmic medium was the medium of the studio, of the large studio, because smaller filmmakers, the really independent of the independent filmmakers, were very limited in their ability to be able to create work that could be seen, distributed, and viewed anywhere else. So that the qualitative argument of film being better, and therefore it's the one thing that we really need to have, as opposed to the evil digital realm sort of coming in like a juggernaut and like taking over everything, I think misses some of the important sensitivities even to artists themselves, for whom economics are very important. For instance, that $3,000 film in canisters can now be distributed for $300 as a hard drive DCP, a digital cinema package, which is how these systems work. And when the projectionist, as it were, gets these in the theater, he inserts it into a machine, punches in certain keys, etc., to open the package. He ingests it into the machinery that's going to actually project the work, and there it is. So that's your film. It doesn't seem to me like that's necessarily a bad thing if it now means that instead of 3 theaters, your film can now be seen in 300 theaters, because the same amount of money that you would have had to spend on distribution means that you can now distribute the work in many different ways. So that's one huge advantage, let's just say. Additionally, one of the kind of unfortunate, I think, arguments that a lot of people make is that, oh wow, man, like digital just doesn't look as good as film. It's crap. I've heard this argument many, many times. And all I think I would have to say is, if you give things their proper time in history, you're going to find that there's a lot of interest on the part of a lot of people to develop something to a point where the quality is going to be what people want. The initial state of film, again, at the turn of the last century, was atrocious, was terrible. These prints were horrendous. But it didn't stop people from developing further, because, of course, film itself had its own battles to face. A lot of people were people of the theater and live performance, and they're like, why, this is killing the live performers, because instead of seeing the real thing, us sort of standing there, now we get to see a bad representative of all of this in the form of some weird, poorly done, no sound imagery being portrayed on a flat screen. How is that better than a live performance? And those critiques were, I think, valid, except that you also have to say that with the advent of film, you were able to do certain things. You were able to compress time. You could change perspectives by having cuts. You could have a lot of new and interesting special effects. You could, for example, portray a dream, which Charlie Chaplin did in one of his films, where he kind of goes into a dream, and through the use of semi-transparent overlays, you could see him sort of in this dream state. And we're talking about, barely into the new century last time, whereas in an actual live production, to portray a dream would have required major production design and stage design trickery. So those things are considerations that have to happen in the friction when one model or of performance or of art, etc., which has been developed over a long period of time comes in contact, almost like seismic or tectonic friction, with a new one which has not developed entirely and has not seen its evolution reach, the full light of day just yet. So that these are arguments about art, but they're also arguments about conventional tastes that people have at a specific period of time. Clearly, film developed over time into a kind of, through Technicolor, CinemaScope, anamorphic lenses. I mean, there were so many experiments, and it developed over time into something that people came to love and to see as a properly evolved form. At the same time, digital or non-film technologies began to also go through their rough initial periods. Everybody remembers who was around the emergence of things like Mary Hartman, or other television programs which were no longer done in film but started to be done in video, for example. And the video had this cold and flat quality about it, where the was very hard-edged and just did not seem to give people what they had seen before, and there was a fair amount of outcry about it. Sure, it was an economic decision. It was a lot cheaper and quicker to produce video than it was to develop film, and faster to edit eventually. But when digital film came along, it too went through a series of evolutions, which it is still undergoing today. And a lot of those have been there to sort of give it a kind of depth and a kind of quality and a kind of character. And I know when I edit something that I look at, I can make it look in many different ways, much more variegated and textured and different than I would have been able to do if I had just been able to only work with film. So it seems to me that there are many more choices in that regard as well, and your editing is a lot faster. So it seems to me that, yes, it's true that if we want to actually, land on top of something and critique it because it's not as evolved as something that's been here before, that's actually true. But its evolutionary path will be different at the same time from what has come before. And you can't stop progress. I mean, you don't want to do that. You just want to see which way something blossoms. It's like having children. You have your first child, and your first child comes up a certain way, and here's your second child, doesn't look or doesn't behave in the same way as your elder child. You don't want to say, well, why can't you be more like Johnny? It's probably the worst thing you could say to someone like that. Because every medium, like every person, has its own personality. It comes up in its own time. It has to have its own chance, to develop in the way that it's going to develop. And people who didn't necessarily love working with the mechanics of film, but loved computers, for example, could probably go in there and make contributions to the overall art of moving visual imagery that they would never have imagined being involved with in any other way. And that's how it works. I mean, in a way, you can also imagine, for instance, sound, so that, I have heard many arguments about the lost texture of, the phonograph. Well, it's true. I mean, I grew up with phonographs, and it's true you could play them in different speeds. If you were going to go with 33 and a half third, or maybe you could go with 16, or you could go with 45s, which were the older ones, the revolutions per minute, and those phonographs would give you different qualities. But at the same time, the material, physical nature of the medium also made you have to live with things that had to do with degradation of that medium, in the same way as the filmic medium degrades, so that there were scratches and there were all these problems. So a lot of people might think that was really cute, but it wasn't that cute when you didn't have any option for it. Nobody wants to put on an album and have to deal with scratches, and it's like a broken record and it just keeps repeating. I mean, these are not fun things for a lot of people to hear about, literally. And artists don't record in the most careful circumstances with the best microphones available in their day, so that when the thing is played back, it's going to be subject to and the victim of all of these other material degradations of the medium. I mean, honestly, if you could see Rudy Valentino or Charlie Chaplin in color in 1914, you would have preferred to see that. At least to some degree, you wouldn't mind having the option. Today, anything that's recorded in color can be downgraded to black and white, and scratches and weathering can be added to it so that you can go back and look at something in a kind of nostalgic style or view. The other piece that's really important in here, and you gotta bring this into it, ultimately, is that what is the real content like? It doesn't matter to me if something is recorded, as a film on a cell phone or a Panavision camera. Ultimately, if it's not good, I don't care. If I get to see some other Marvel comic thing out there, in enormous IMAX, full color, blown away, it doesn't matter to me whether it's film or not. I'm going to judge that by the standards of a film that deserves to be absorbed as a work of art for me. And if the acting is bad or the action is too formulaic, that's not going to impress me. I mean, I can still look at something like, say, for example, My Dinner with Andre, and I can look at that and there's a film that doesn't have special effects, hardly any music, not a whole lot of shot changes. The entire film pretty much takes place in one scene in a restaurant, and people are transfixed by this film because it is exactly by the removal of all of these changing elements that you are compelled to listen to what people are saying. And if you're not interested in hearing it, then that's fine, but that's the conversation. And the conversation has a lot of substance to it, a lot of enigmatic qualities to that film. And Louis Malle knew that he would be creating a work that had something of a performatively hypnotic style. So those things are very important. You got to put that in. You got to make that the work. And if I had seen that on a cell phone, or if I had seen that in a movie theater, ultimately I'm going to be carried, swayed by the quality of the work itself. I don't think any self-respecting reviewer or historian or critic is ever going to look at something and go, well, the film was weak, but the special effects were so great that I'm giving this one the thumbs up. I mean, that's ludicrous, because anything with great special effects is going to make you watch it once or twice. It's not ever going to assume a place in history. And it's the same thing with almost anything else. I don't care if the synthesizer appears after the piano. Who can sit there and play the thing that you really want to hear? That's the piece you really are going to be moved by, not whether it sounds one way or the other, right? I mean, rhythm is a medium-independent dimension of music, in the same way as narrative is a medium-independent element of, say, film or performance, right? So ultimately, you have to take all these other qualities into consideration. If I looked at a photograph by, let's say, Edward Steichen, and I thought maybe the photograph isn't as good as others, or maybe it's way ahead of its time, it doesn't matter to me. Ultimately, whether that photograph is properly framed, properly composed, then for me, that's what that photograph will give me. The photograph doesn't become a work of art in the developing room, right? So it's already something that I would like to imagine the photographer created and brought into the world with what began as a real-life moment, captured down into a momentary vision that then became inscribed in the press of a button, and everything else, in my view, is completely secondary to that. The artist has only control of what they're going to give you, and the rest of the medium has control of how it's going to give it to you. And I wouldn't say that one is irrelevant, but I would say that one is predominant. And the artist is always first. The medium is never first, it's always second. So the arguments about whether we should go back to a given medium, or something's being gained or something's being lost, to me don't carry any weight at all. If you found that your favorite author had written this novel, let's say, or this play by hand, or using a word processor from the 1980s, or using a typewriter from the 1940s, or using a computer from today, or anything. It doesn't matter to me. If you like it and you're moved, you're going to be moved by the words that were written, not how they were written or what medium they were archived in, right? So let's not lose sight of the fact that poetics and aesthetics and meaning can never be constrained by any given medium. They're opened by a medium. They're expanded by a medium. They're given an opportunity for experience in a medium. And the medium itself has to have every opportunity, just like every other medium has before it, to evolve and to develop and have its chance. And when it does so, over time, we'll find that that medium looked totally different from the previous one. And, perhaps Lamentations were premature and maybe completely misguided. And I think, therefore, we should be progressive and optimistic about these things. And critics, reviewers, and historians should be the first ones to embrace that, because they're the ones who have real temporal continuity and context in seeing many things over time. And yet, sadly, some of these people, to me, are the most doctrinaire and single-minded and ideological. I don't understand it, but I'm not fanatical in that way, and I hope you're not either. So let's go in there and enjoy whatever and forget what anybody else tells us. Just come to your own conclusions about what you like, and that in the end is what will take you where you need to go. Thanks, and until next time.